Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Hey, down here, we're back to the old format, and I wanted to introduce, we got a new guest that I just found out is already running in some of the same circles, but shout out to my Cherie for recommending me to connect with Kunami Codes. So here's Kunami Codes on the show, and we were already pre-gaming a little bit, and I already know that we're going to have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, comics and Gematria and music and all sorts of things, but let Kunami Codes introduce himself first, and then we'll get into it.
Love, peace, and power. Thank you so much for the invite. It is truly an honor to be on your platform. Special love and shout out to Cherie for the alley-oop, the connect. Wonderful. I'm honored to be here. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. And yeah, shout out to my Cherie for the alley-oop. And we were talking Anu Saru apparently is another acquaintance. So like you're already in good company. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more to you, mainly because I hadn't heard of you until my Cherie pointed it out. And I was looking through your content, and I was just seeing video games and music and comic books and Gematria, and I was like, all right, I'm sold already. So here we are talking about it. And honestly, since you said alley-oop, I usually don't talk about anything like current event related, maybe to my detriment. But I wanted to know if you've got any take at all on the WNBA recently and like the Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark and whatever else is going on and like all the new attention that they're getting. Do you got any thoughts on that at all?
It's very, very interesting, but for me, it's very telling. The WNBA has been around now for close to 30 years, 25 years,
25 years already?
I'm not sure.
I'll look it up. Keep going.
I remember Rebecca Lobo, and some of the beginning iconic players, but I know it's been at least
1996. So
right.
Right now that makes this almost the 30th season. When we're in the 28th season since 96. That's wild. I didn't even know it was that. I thought it was like 10 years old. Anyways, go on, man.
But that's because we don't pay attention to it. Mm. Like this is really a testament because nothing you could do could force us to pay attention, and we gotta really question that as a collective at some point because why is it so easy to watch men run around? You know what I'm saying? In these baggy uniforms or in these tight uniforms, and not the women. You know what I mean? Like that's just questionable. Now, I don't want to say too much, you know what I'm saying? But The WNBA right now, they found a way to make it work and to make it click. And it's also about your scope of vision. So, they're never going to take the NBA and put that on Disney Plus. The WNBA is on Disney Plus.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
You see what I mean? Like their placement is becoming more strategic, but their behavior, and if we look at the numbers of the players, I forget the woman who had the flagrant foul against I think Caitlin Clark, where she knocked her down.
Yeah, I can't even pronounce. It's like It's another CC, which I think might add to that animosity because now they're fighting over their initials too.
Exactly, but see, that's the level of awareness you really have to have if we're really going to get into decoding these things, because it's not just the supposed powers that should not be that are behind the scenes pulling these strings, but it's spiritual first. Spirit doesn't care about color or gender or vessel or ideology or none of that shit. It cares about being seen and being understood. And that just takes a little bit of work and dedication. Some things are always going to be blatant, but it's the subtle things that we really want to pay attention to. The alphanumerics or the gematria, when you see certain, I'm trying to think of an example. Everybody's familiar with The Wire. TV show from the 80s.
And if not, you better stop what you're doing now and put a bookmark in this and go and watch at least seasons 1 through 4, which is, I think, the whole show. And then come back.
Well, it's funny you say that. Season 5 was the final season. That's actually right. My favorite because it brought everything together, but it showed you everything through the lens of a newspaper. Now, imagine if it did that throughout the entire series. That was very, very strategic. You have instances where, if we're familiar with the number 42, for example, 42 in relation to gematria is like the N-word, right? But we know on the flip side of that, if we look at things like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, 42 is the answer to everything. And we know that there's 42 Kabbalistic paths, all right, on the Sephirotic tree. So what are we really talking about here? We have to invert. So they'll show you that through characters like Jackie Robinson. They'll show you that in certain characters in The Wire who wear this jersey and wear this number and then get killed, right? And there'll be a name like Mondo Mart, right? And both M's, of course, are capitalized, but if you turn those M's 90 degrees to the right, you get 33. So they're telling you who's doing what. But if you don't recognize this language, if you don't speak it, you don't speak it. You got to get somebody to interpret, and then you have to trust.
Website that I've been working on with Ani and Tommy, Truthful. It's called Occult Decode, and like when you say, for example, the number 42. So if I go in here and put 42, and I'm wondering, do you work with any specific ciphers in particular? Because I've been learning about all the ins and outs of gematria for maybe the last year at best, and I still am just barely scratching the surface. And one of the things that throws me off the most is just the number of different ciphers and the fact that some people make their own custom ciphers. And I'm not sure, like, is there a certain one that you should be like backing all the time or sticking with, or is it arbitrary?
Okay, first and foremost, I got to say, I absolutely love what y'all are doing. Bravo. I will stand up and clap. It's so important to understand the different ciphers and what they represent. First and foremost, every so-called secret society has its own cipher. So if we look at, for example, the Order of Jesters, one of the wickedest, right? If we look at the Order of the Rosicrucians, we look at the Knights of the Golden Circle, any denomination of Freemasonry, they all have their own cipher. I cannot stress that enough. You have the 4 base ciphers, like Zachary Hubbard tends to focus on, right? And that's cool. But the issue with that is it's going to keep you at base level. And, and everything will be about the Jesuits, which to a large degree, arguably, it may be, but it's about more than that. So you really want to have a broad knowledge of all the ciphers that are available to you. You guys are doing that brilliantly. An example of what you were talking about is like the Fibonacci cipher, for example. That is a more recent invention. Pay attention to these people who create these ciphers also, because 9 times out of 10, they already existed. And I'm not trying to throw no shade on nobody. You know what I'm saying? They already existed under a different name in a different system.
I've seen that one a lot because since I started running this, right? And this is open for suggestions. If anyone ever wants like a new feature, a new cipher, and the number one request I get are to add new ciphers. And most of the time it's a little bit difficult because usually someone would just give me the name of the cipher, and looking it up, you might find like 3 or 4 variations where the letters and the numbers don't exactly match. And then at certain points, I've realized after hours of work, like, wait a minute, this is just English Kabbalah by some different names. Someone was like, the triple bubble Pythagorean. They almost sound like marijuana strains at a certain point.
Exactly.
And it adds confusion. And I always wonder, was that just somebody trying to like trademark someone else's cipher and like take credit? Or I don't understand why there's so many ciphers with different names that are literally the exact same numbers.
It's a little bit of both. But I want you to think about something. Collectively, the majority of the world, especially here in the Western Hemisphere, they hate math.
I can attest to that. I hated math for the longest time, man.
Well, to a large degree, that's because this aspect of the occult, of the esoteric understandings of mathematics has been removed. You would love algebra if you understood that it was about finding the formula, right? And i.e. finding the cipher. Trigonometry is about finding an angle. Calculus is about finding a certain calculation, right? Certain trajectories. We're only talking about ciphers. We're talking about different systems for the same number. You can get to 5 via 14, via 23 in different ways, but it's different frequencies, but it's the same base. So what are we really talking about here? We're only talking about perspective. My personal favorite cipher is the Sumerian cipher. It's one of the oldest, and it gives some of the more powerful terminologies and frequencies and outcomes, verbiages. But when you go to Gematrix.org, for example, they have it labeled as English. So
that's
now
one of the main offenders, to be honest.
You see what I mean? You're going to be confused, but this is on purpose. This points to the fact of how powerful the science is. The more you study it, and I can't stress, I really can't stress enough, you want to have a broad understanding, because it's very easy to get lost in Chaldean. Chaldean, for example, goes up to 8, right? We know that layout is completely different. They revered the number 9 so much that they didn't recognize it. Some people take that as disrespect. Some people take it as reverence. That it's really all based on perspective. When you get to Pythagorean, we're back to 9. But how things change when you realize that the number of man is 6, you understand that Sumerian has a little bit more power, especially reverse. The A is 6, B is 12, C is 18, all the way up to Z, which is 156. When I first really learned the science about 16 years ago, I blew my own mind. I've had many experiences with psychics and mediums, and when you know the energy, you know it. But I had an interaction with my teacher, and he asked me my name. My name is kind of unique. It's Kenyan. My father had an obsession with Superman, and our tribe is the Kikuyu of Kenya. Superman's real name is Kal-El. So he took Kikuyu and Kal-El and got Kilel Kiano. That is my given birth name. It's not no made up nothing.
And so you were born into comic books, essentially.
Most definitely. Spider-Man Spider-Man ties into that as well in my culture, because my name would be Kweku Akua. Kweku means Wednesday born. Akua is like Anansi, the spider god, the original trickster god. This is where we get like iterations of Loki and different tricksters. Even Zeus has been a trickster, changing his form to do certain things to different people. In numerology, there's a book, The Complete Magician's Tablets by Stephen Skinner, that gives you a wonderful concordance that shows you how numerology and gods across pantheons stay the same. So you can talk about a god in the Greek pantheon, you can talk about a god in the Kemetic or the Egyptian pantheon, and you can see how they're actually the same on a certain frequency. So again, it's all about perspective, because it's the same story with different names. The numerology is so specific, we don't necessarily have to worry about the interpretation of the mythology.
That one's, dude, that's kind of wild the way that you explain that, because first of all, also shout out to the Joseph Campbell Here with a Thousand Faces and The Power of Myth and all those series, which also has that exact same premise that all these different gods are the same god, just kind of like repeated through different cultures and reused. But there's also some really wild gematria and numerology behind the names of the god. I think it's like Jesus and Apollo and Dionysus and a few others, that even if you break the numbers down out of the words, like they start lining up as well, which, like, I don't know, I've got a kind of a rule, right? That after you see 2 or 3 things, at least to me, everyone's got different numbers, but to me, 2 or 3, I'm still in like coincidence field. You know what I mean? Some people see 2 things that are similar and they're like, oh my God, it's all connected, like right away. Like I got to see like 3 or 4, like maybe 7 or more. And then I'll be like, all right, there's definitely something to this. And when it comes to breaking down the gematria of the names of gods and the way that they correlate in very refined precision, like all the way to like Parables on the Mount, to like all their ancient stories in different languages, and all the key phrases will add up to the same numbers, which is like the one thing that really got me into gematria more than just a passive hobby. Like it's not Sudoku to me, right? There's like something more to it.
Is so powerful. Is the way I do my readings. I'll get you information, after this, and I'll give you a reading for free, because you'll get to see for yourself in your grimoire how your frequencies are either dominant or dormant, right? So what does that mean? That means, like, if you look at, okay, we'll go back to the Sumerian cipher. If you look at Jesus equals 444. Lucifer equals 444. Muhammad equals 444. Messiah equals 444. Right? And it goes on and on and on. Like, you can't, like, hold on, wait a minute. There's a pattern here. You see? So when you look at this frequency, it's not so. In other words, it's not just about Jay-Z. Jay-Z had an album called 444, which was like his true step into what's passable for consciousness as far as rap goes, right?
Here's another feature I just added. I just put in 444 and check Sumerian here. And then it'll give me all the different results just out of what people have searched for. And look what else is there. Abraxas is 444.
Gnostic God, yes indeed.
That's nuts. Aztecs is 444. Yeah, there's so many. Bigfoot.
Yeah,
wow, Bigfoot's 444. So Bigfoot is numerologically equivalent to Jesus and Lucifer and Muhammad and Messiah.
And so is Bob Barker.
Hell yeah, he is.
Now,
Breaking Bad. Wow.
Now you see above that where you had Bird Box.
Mm-hmm.
Bird Box was one of those movies that came out on Netflix on like a Friday with no promotion and blew up over the weekend. This was a few years ago.
I remember that.
What I mean? Like, you can begin to understand why when you look at the company it keeps in the frequency. That's how that works. So case in point, I'll use myself as an example. My name, Kilel, comes to 396. 396 is equal to Sandman. It's equal to...
Oh, how do you spell it properly?
Kilelle.
There we go. I was missing an L in there. All right, so we've got
Sandman. You've got Ruby, right? Now, anybody who's familiar with the Sandman knows that the Ruby is one of his weapons, right? It's one of his tools. So do the writers, what the real question is, do we want to give the writers credit or do we want to recognize the frequency speaking for itself? It's just about us to know. So, Nikola Tesla is quoted as saying, if you understood the secrets of 369, you'll understand the powers of the universe.
Yeah, well, that's vector math, right?
Indeed. Well, I have and I'm not bigging myself up. It's just what I am. I have a propensity for mathematics because my birthday is 12/24/1980. Well, if you break that down, that's actually 369. My name itself is 396, and it goes even further than that. I'm from Detroit, which is on the 42nd parallel. You can round that off to 7 because it's 4.26. Enneagram. It doesn't stop. Along with 1111 being a bridge, or my initials are KK, which actually takes me back to Ki. In both of my names, it goes back to a Sumerian goddess. So, the relationships don't stop. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself in one dynamic or one dimension when you are powerful in all of them. So when we say that this is a reflection of you, that's exactly what it is. Gematria and numerology are the top science to really showcase that.
I'm actually glad that you said the word pigeonhole, because that's what I've always called this 369 vector math diagram when I've seen it, just because Tesla was obsessed with pigeons, and this was his sort of claim to fame was his 369. But he was and for anyone that's watching, or if you're listening, I'll try to describe it. But basically, if you take a circle and you put numbers from 1 to 9 around the circumference of that circle clockwise, and then you just connect all the numbers to each other. So if you start at 1 can connect to 2, which connects to 4, and it kind of like bounces around in this very predictable shape. But 3, 6, and 9 are on their own path that are like not on the same path as every other number. And I think that this was sort of the concept of like breaking out of this infinite loop, which literally looks like an infinity symbol, right? If you were to like round the edges on this thing. So that turns into just like this infinite loop. But 369, among its many different interpretations, it kind of like stands outside of the constant loop of just like normality, I guess. It's really hard to describe, but this is one of the aspects of why he said 369 was so important. This is one of those things, is this little vector math graph. So I always found this really interesting.
Indeed. Shout out to Slick Dissonant. This is the Enneagram. This specifically. But if you want to begin to try to understand, like, for example, like vortex, more mathematics, think about the Ouroboros, right? Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its own tail. That is representative of the 0. The 0 is not a placeholder. It is the divine portal that gives birth to all numbers, 1 through 9. 5 is the heart, right in the center. 10 is the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Everything after that is a repeat. So if you think about the Ouroboros and you think about the Enneagram you were just looking at, think about the scales on a snake, right? So that would be a grouping of scales. Now multiply that kind of like a flower of life grid, and now you have a universe. This is what Terrence Howard was sort of kind of trying to say, and I'm not trying to validate any of that bullshit at all.
Because a lot of that you beat me to it.
You know what I'm saying? The majority of what he was talking about was some bullshit, but what he was trying to say was that, like, we're talking about the Ouroboros. Ouroboros is the idea of what we call time, which only exists here.
So I got a question for you on all this, specifically because I was raised to hate math, and I do blame the Jesuits, because to be fair, the Jesuits did control education and information for God knows how long, like thousands of years plus. Relatively, versus any other form of education that we've got. Like, they've kind of shaped it in the Western world. So I kind of partly blame them for me hating math, although maybe it was just my math teachers that I grew up in. But one of the questions that I got when it comes to like Flower of Life, vector math with the 369, Gematria, and all these different numbers, a lot of this is premise on like almost a base 10 system. At least vector math is, right? This represents kind of base 10. Whereas maybe like Fibonacci and some of these other ciphers don't exactly represent base 10 the same way that Sumerian would almost be like base 8, right? Because every time you get to 8, you start back over at 1 again. And septenary would be base 7 and Sumerian would be base 6. So that's one aspect of math that I never got to even know about until I got into software engineering, where you have to learn about like hexadecimal and stuff, which are like base 16 and other, different sort of languages use different bases. So growing up only knowing about base 10, but if you know about Gematria, you know about all these different ones. So when it comes to vector math, though, like, does all this break down and all these patterns and all the numbers that you see and everything, like, what if humanity was running on base 12, right? Like, what if we had 6 fingers and 6 toes? So now everything is going to be divisible by 12s instead of 10s, or 6s instead of 5s. Like, would that, in your mind, do all the patterns and everything else stay cohesive, or does it change how everything communicates with each other just on how, like, we're interpreting it? Does that make sense the way I'm asking that?
Yeah, no, perfect sense. It does both. It does both. It changes and it stays the same. And much like we do, when someone's watching you, you tend to feel it, especially if you're really a spirit and soul. You can feel that energy, you can feel that attention on you. And we see the same thing in machines. So, if we look at, the beginnings of artificial intelligence, or what they call artificial intelligence, you'll see experiments where they had computers talking to each other, based on their very, very limited programming. And then they would create their own algorithms and begin talking to each other in a language only they could understand. Well, children do this. Specifically, twins do this, right? Twins and triplets and siblings. So we're talking about the exact same phenomenon in different medium.
The way that you just, that was such a perfect analogy, because like, I'll give one example that might be a little bit more technical than it needs to be, but in the current iteration of AI image generation, out of all the different types of AI generation, which all work in different ways, but in image generation, you've got this concept of like a variable encoder. So when you train a certain model and it spits out an image, it doesn't just like spit the image out automatically. It spits it out in sort of this garbled mess. You can kind of make it out, but it's kind of like encoded in a way. And you have to know almost what the cipher is to decode what that like kind of a mess is. It looks like a really blocky JPEG. Like if you want to generate a car, you get like a really weird blocky car when the colors aren't right and like there's seams on it. But if you know what to decode it with the cipher, then it basically converts that blocky version into like a high pristine, digital version of it. And it's almost, and the weird thing is that if you have different models that were all trained off that one base model, they can all share the same VAE that does that decoding. So even if you've got like all these permutations that like one generates cartoons and one generates like realistic images and stuff, as long as they all share that same like family tree, you could say, then they all can kind of like speak the same language in a way and decode this thing. So like the analogy for twins and AI learning how to talk amongst themselves is like such a like twin language. It's such a perfect analogy for AI.
Well, thank you. It is. Well, you see it. You see it in, what is that movie? Free Guy. You see it in Free Guy with what is his name? He's Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, right.
You see it in that. You also see it in,
which is basically he's like an NPC, I believe, is the premise of that whole movie.
Right. Exactly. And it because it's a comedy, it tends to make fun of the science and the jewels that it actually drops, but it drops a lot. There's another one called animated movie from a few years ago. I think it was Wreck-It Ralph.
Oh, yeah.
Wreck-It Ralph drops some similar information, some similar jewels. Very, very dope. But it's math and it's programming. Now, anybody who's familiar with 3D printing will also know about this. And of course, anybody who makes any of their own programs or video games, even comic books to a large degree, because one thing about entertainment, it all starts out with storyboards. So everybody is a bit of a comic artist when it comes to entertainment, whether they realize it or not.
So go on with the storyboard analogy, or I use storyboards for almost everything because I do games and comics and animations, and the whole reason that I even got into doing comics was because when I first started out, I wanted to, I had like my eyes in the sky, my eyes on the prize, and had no idea what actually went into generating some of the content. I was just like, I want to make a 4-hour animated movie, or I want to make like a 20-minute animated series. And then you realize that no matter what you want to do, if it's a comic book, a game, an animation, they all need a storyboard. And in my mind, the comic book was almost just like a really detailed storyboard, but it could still be used, like the storyboard could be used to make a movie the same way that a comic can be used to make a movie. And for that reason, there are lots of comics that lend themselves very well to going in the movies, because like a comic book itself is a very detailed storyboard.
Most definitely. I've looked at your work just a little bit. I love it. I can't wait to get it on to really dive into it. Storyboarding is ultimately about perspective. It's about what you want to show, what you want to display, and where you want the focus to be. So if we're trained as viewers, as readers, to pay attention to the foreground. The artist, essentially is paying more attention to the background, right? Because it's about it's almost like a target. I know you're going to be drawn here, but now I want you to expand. So, in these 4x4 panels, you can do so much. Look at the idea of reading manga versus reading comic books, going from left to right and right to left, how that affects the eye. When it comes to media, you have this whole idea where they've tracked the human eye when it watches a movie, so we can see what people focus on and why.
That was huge. So my time at Disney, one of the biggest things that they were very thrilled about was that if you go to like one of the kiosks they've got after you get off a ride, or like when you're waiting in line or whatever, like a quick little interactive thing, all those things are loaded up with little cameras specifically to do little heat maps, so that tracks exactly where your eye is looking at, and it just takes a record of like at this time, 5 seconds in they're looking here, 6 seconds in they're looking here. And they just record the coordinates of where your eyes are looking on this big screen for however long your interaction is. So by the time you walk away, they generate like a visual heat map that shows you like the red areas for where they stared the most, all the way to a gradient of green where they stared the least. And then it has a whole thing of like 80% of the time they were looking at this area, and that's what they used to determine, okay, take that big link that said buy a new Happy or like a McDonald's, like a Mickey McDonald's Happy Meal from like their on-store thing. If they weren't looking at it enough, they'd raise it up a little bit and then see if it was in the red and keep raising it and moving around the page until people's irises would show the heat map was actually working on whatever advertising they're trying to push.
Indeed. It's the same. See, color, frequency, sound frequency are essentially the same thing. It's just about one being free flowing and one being stationary. So when you look at restaurants, for example, they do the same thing with color. Red means get it and go. Where a nice restaurant is going to have more earthy tones. So time doesn't matter. You see, that's why it's called fast food. You see what I mean? It's the same with entertainment. Entertainment, you have certain colors that are going to draw you instantly.
These emotional color wheels are kind of helpful, although they tend to be cultural specific. Like, for example, red in China is different than red in the US in some instances, but I think that there's also something that would probably tie all different cultures together. Like, maybe it's because I'm a fish in water and I only know that blue's always been like a calming, serene color, right? Like, I've never known blue ever to be something that like invigorates rage, because red is the color of blood. So just, seeing red, it's almost like, like the concept goes so much deeper than culture. Like, red meaning blood, meaning anger or agitation or just adrenaline in general. Whereas blue is what happens when, you chill out or you get colder or you even die. So it almost seems that this very nature of being on the color wheel in opposition almost, or basically like a triad, that the colors relation to our moods almost correlates the same way that the Enneagram wheel does, right? Like, yeah, there's 9 numbers, but it might not be incredibly arbitrary the same way that the colors don't have to be arbitrary.
Well, color is a perfect example of what you were talking about earlier in terms of how things change but remain the same, right? If we look at red, for example, the current connotation is going to be anger. It's going to be root chakra. It's going to be aggression, things of that nature, as opposed to thousands of years ago when it meant beauty because it was attached to birth. Now, women are still having children, right? And most women, not all, but most women would tell you, it was the most beautiful experience they've ever had, and blood is the last thing they were thinking about. But connotation has changed. Views on birth, views on children, views on relationships. We're at war if we look at the media, right? So it's only really the perspective that changes. But the thing in question is it hasn't changed at all. So blue is peaceful, it's serenity, it's the color of water, it's the color of the sky, it's the color of the firmament, the water's above the firmament, right? But blue is also known as the color of deception. So, it's how we choose to see something is so important, but this is also why study is so important. Now, you as an artist know this better than most because you have to understand, this is what I mean in America, but how are people reading this comic going to view it in Japan? How are they going to view it over here? Because over here, this means this. You know what I mean? So do we have to go so far as to have a warning or an editor's note? That's just based on perspective. How courteous do you want to be? Do you care about, what I'm saying? How much do we care about interpretation? How much do we truly want to know? Do we want to know or do we want to believe? and we can't really mix those two. People who are on the fence, I can deal with. I'm not trying to convince anybody, because once you get into any kind of study, the study speaks for itself. You don't have to try to convince or, point out this fact. It just is what it is. But people get emotionally attached to some of these tenets. They become cultural, they become religious. How
much do you think of that is planned? Like, do you think that there's like McDonald's corporate is getting together and they're like, we need to keep red the hunger color? You know what I mean? We can't let it go to blue because then, I don't know, like we can't let it go to green because then Perkins starts to win out. Or do you think that they just study and they notice, oh, people get hungry when they see red, so let's make red our color? Is it both? Is it like one or the other?
Is I would say both. Corporations like McDonald's hire some of the best corporate artists and decoders in the game, and you will never know about it because they'll have 10 and 15-year contracts before they're allowed to go to Burger King or allowed to go to Sheetz. Like anybody familiar with the Sheetz gas station chain, for example, will see that their food. It's we have it here in the South. I saw they're building one in Detroit, where I'm from, just a couple weeks ago.
This is with a Z? Sheetz with a Z?
I think so.
This is wild. It's almost like the Sprite of the 90s commercials where like they're going after a Sheetz demo, I guess.
Well,
I've never heard of this before. I've never heard of. Is this the one that we're talking about? SHEETZ?
Yep, that's it.
Look at the hand sign. Oh, sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen. Dude, I don't know if you've seen this before. Look at the hand sign on the homepage of Sheetz. This is so wild.
Exactly. And you see that sign in the background, that MTO. You see what I mean? Like they know how to advertise, and then you got to look at the building. You see it's all just straight brick. You know what I'm saying? So
that's wild, man. That's wild.
Their symbolism is crazy, and Sheetz is like it's like the club.
We got a 33 here too. You got the 93, and then the first 3 you see to the right of that is this 3 up here.
Indeed. Like they know how to bring you in through frequency. I mean, just look at what she's wearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the red is strategically placed throughout the entire ad. And that gets into a whole nother science. But this is how they're telling themselves. I mean, my God, look at that neck. You know what I'm saying? That's serious, strong ass neck. They've expanded wildly in the last 10 years. I was a truck driver about 10 years ago, and they have moved in a way that is completely occult. They're telling you that they know how to keep your attention, and these are these same people, because the consulting agent for Sheetz was at McDonald's 15 years prior. So you can see how it expands. You just kind of have to know where to look.
Yeah, that's why it looks like it's specifically in Central PA only right now. So as they're expanding, like they're on the ground floor of expanding outside of this one little region, I guess.
Indeed, that Northeast corridor is a lot of money, especially up I-95.
That's wild, man. I never heard of him before. I can't even believe that the first thing I popped up was her doing like the horn signs in the front. And like I was saying, like it seems like they're not just selling gas, like they're selling a lifestyle, which is weird for a gas station to sell a lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Indeed. And then, look at their...
Oh, wow, look at the sticker, dude.
Right. You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
Look at their symbology, but look at how they're speaking to you. They're speaking in language, what did that say before? Keeping something.
Keep it moving, keeping you moving.
Look how they spell it. Now, what does that come to? You see what I mean? Like, they're doing that for a reason. Like, on the surface, it seems like, oh, it's cool, they're speaking my language, but numerically, that comes up to something specific.
Well, keeping you moving, for example, and if what we're doing, Chaldean, and what was the other one that you liked a lot? Sumerian?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So you got 63 and 1164, but just by putting the G's in there, yeah, you got 69 and 1248. So without going through all the different comparison, but it actually does make a very material difference between the spelling based on what other phrases that it might match up with. So like without the G's, you've got a whole bunch of matches for just 63. So, I mean, we won't go through all of them, but there's a bunch of them.
Exactly. You see, but that's where the homework comes in. That's where you really have to be about your study. Just a little bit. You'd be amazed what you see in a movie title. You'd be amazed what you see in an episode name. You'd be amazed what you see in anything that is shown to you through mass media. It's all there for a reason. It's programming that's been laid out for a very long time.
And just to throw on a little bit of this extra, but like even in their their mission statement, what's a sheets? This is at the very top of their About Us page, saying our magic power is giving you what you want, when you want it, and then it's even unbeatable convenience that's always with a Z served with a smile. So like they're definitely doubling down on all this concept.
Right, and what they're really doing is they're playing more into an older trope. If
And
you look at,
here's the actual sheets with a Z.
right, like if you remember Rite Aid, right, but it's not RIGHT, it's RITE, which is like a right. Right? They don't spell anything correctly, and they haven't done that for a long time. But now you see more of that in one place, more of that in one affiliate, more of that in one brand, like you see here.
I think they call him OG Bob Sheets. So I assume that's the guy in the middle is OG.
Right. Well, another one would be Wendy's. I forget his name, the guy, the owner. Dave Thomas. If you look at the Wendy's logo, you'll see that it has the word mom hidden in it.
Right, and he was an orphan, I believe, which is some of the explanation behind why that had that in there. Let me see if I can find one. I can't remember exactly where it was. I think it was in her bonnet. Oh yeah, it's right here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like her frilly little, like the neck of the logo.
Right. You see, like they know how to draw certain attention. And the issue is, to collectively, we don't. The more people get into, decoding of any nature, I don't care what you decode, you'll have a more universal perspective, and it's needed, especially for where we're going. This is the year of the dragon. So we're talking about a lot of karma and a lot of looping. It's either about evolution or it's about going back to the same. But we're going to a more defined aspect of that next year with the year of the snake. We're talking about Kundalini. So an example of energy, for anybody who's familiar with church, Pentecostal, Methodist, Southern Baptist, any church where you catch the Holy Ghost, so to speak, you've got three different aspects of people. You got people who want to be seen, right? Some people who just, oh, thank you, Jesus, and they fall out because they got a new outfit on and they want to run around the church and be seen.
Look at me. I'm talking to the angels.
Exactly. Then you have the genuine people who, because of music and, you know, their own perspective, they really tap into their own kundalini and they have a blockage removed, right? Because they're in the church, because they're not really dealing with, you know, the true esoteric knowledge, that experience becomes religified because they don't take it further. So now that feeling was so energetic and so, dare I say, empowering, now it becomes a religious experience that only happens in church. You don't bring it outside with you.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite tangents right here, because in NLP terminology, this would be considered like anchoring somebody. And if you think back on like all like the old churches, right, before American even existed, like an old European church, this would be a place that you would go to and you would see colors that you would never see anywhere else, because they had the stained glass windows that would project light in these weird ways that you just wouldn't ever see in your normal daily life. You'd smell things that you would never smell. Like you're just not walking across frankincense and myrrh just like haphazardly, you know what I mean? Like all these different sights and smells and sounds and the way that it would reverberate in these cathedrals, right? All of those things does exactly what you're talking about, where you go here and your senses are overwhelmed with color and smells and experience, and you only go through that particular feeling while you're at church. And over time, you attribute all of those like sensations to just the church. Like, oh, the church is providing these colors and smells and sounds. And they're just kind of like taking credit for it and then building it so that you keep coming back, and you almost attribute them to the power of just creating color in general, as opposed to like they just had really nice windows. You know what I mean?
Exactly. They are essentially playing off of our own ignorance, and of course taking the credit for you coming online. So again, this is why study is so important, because all of this is in the Bible. You know what I'm saying? But
which Bible? You got a preferred version?
I went to school to be a pastor from the age of 4 up until about 16, when I walked away from it because I got tired of getting in trouble for asking certain questions.
What denomination are we talking?
I didn't care. It was I'm from Detroit, so you know it doesn't matter whether you're.
If you go to school to be a pastor, I don't know anything about going to seminary school. Don't you have to like pick a major? Like I'm gonna be a Pentecost, or I'm gonna be Catholic or Protestant, whatever. Or do you just learn theology in general and you can decide what avenue you want to go with?
My majors were biblical mythology and eschatology, which is like the study of end time events. Shout out to Rise and Power to Brother Panic. He would say end time spiritual events.
What does that mean exactly? Just like modern events?
So that's to a large degree what many of us do now. I would say yourself included. But when we have the time to actually look into current events and see how it lines up, what it's trying to reveal and why, what it goes back to. When you look at techniques like the long count, where we can see there's a certain amount of days in between this birth and this death, or this event and this false flag, or this sports event and this political disaster. All of these things are connected through one big web. That would be eschatology. But using the long count, you can see, okay, for example, you have certain days where more people are going to die a month, right? Certain numbers where that will be pushed. And then if it happens to fall on a certain day, like a Thursday or a Sunday, it'll automatically popcorn, because we're talking about expansion, especially Thursday. Jupiter is about expansion, right? The biggest so-called planet or energy source. You can see this wherever you look. So in terms of religion, you got to understand that these sciences are non-existent. You have double talk to the degree of Moses and Jesus have the exact same story, right? The exact same story. Their births are foretold by astrologers, right? To King Herod and to a pharaoh who's unnamed. In the same breath, they'll tell you not to practice soothsaying, numerology, astrology, or any of these occult practices. But they show you, in terms of its most important people or characters, that this is a to the letter science and it works. So what are we supposed to believe here? Because you're not allowed to question when it comes to the dogma, when it comes to the science, when it comes to the religion. You'll be outcasted, or the proper term is excommunicated. When you look at religion and who it was put on through different denominations, for example, so-called Blacks or African Americans, we didn't get Catholicism. So I went to Catholic school, right? I went to private school the majority of my life until I was 16 and I started playing football. I went to public school. But Catholicism was largely put on the so-called Latin community, right? And we can see the behavior modifications. Now, we know when we go into the history of the papal bulls and how if you were to the east or west to a certain degree, you had to speak Portuguese or Spanish, right? That didn't come over here. We got what we call Christianity. So whether it was baptism or Baptist or Methodist or Pentecost, it's all essentially the same thing.
Yeah,
right?
It's a good point, and I'm definitely not a theologian, but like the Lutheran Bible, for example, right? Martin Luther, his big thing was converting the Bible into the language of the common people, right? He put it in German, I think. And then from German, now all of a sudden people can start translating it into the other languages where you didn't have to know like the mother language that was kind of isolated to the Bible for the longest period of time.
Well, see, that's a whole other conversation because, and that's going to play into it too. Currently, I would probably say today's King James Version, because that's the one that most people are familiar with. And I'm the kind of teacher, I like to meet people where they are. So, if that's what you know, cool, we'll make that work and then we can expand to other things. But I love the Coptic Bible, arguably one of the oldest versions. The issue you're going to have is when you deal with language, none of this there was no John in the so-called Middle East. There was no J, for 500 years ago. We're talking about Yakinen. There was no Jesus, Jehovah, none of that. Jehoshaphat. So we're losing frequency. We're dealing with a derivative. So we want to go back through language. Here's a perfect example. And I use this with Christians all the time. If you really know your Bible, you'll recognize a word called Mazzaroth, right? Mazzaroth is purposely left untranslated because it means zodiac. Now, we should be symbol literate enough to be able to look at the 12 tribes of Israel or the 12 sons or the 12 disciples and see certain repeats and be able to connect the dots. But because religion isn't supposed to be questioned, dogma isn't supposed to be questioned, we still have a lot of these, programmings about what these things represent, and it's taken so literal.
Yeah, I didn't know about this. Even the wiki says the precise meaning is uncertain, but it's the context of astronomical constellations, and they show a freaking zodiac right next to it.
If you look at I can't remember offhand, I'm sorry, the verse and the book.
Well, it says right here, there's a book of Job that says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion, lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or guide the bear with her sons? It's all astrological constellation talk.
Oh, most definitely. And there's tons more. There's a verse specifically where it describes all the 12 sons of Jacob, who became Israel, or Yaqub. And it's a perfect description of all of the houses of the zodiac. When Christ says, I go to prepare a way, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it wasn't so, I wouldn't say. Like, he's talking about the houses of the zodiac. Depending upon which system of astrology you use, the sun enters a new house of the zodiac at a degree of 30. And when it leaves at a degree of 33. Well, didn't Jesus start his ministry at 30 and he was put to death at the age of 33? So, this science is being displayed throughout the entirety of the Bible. The Bible itself, the Helios Biblios, or the Sun Book, we're talking about the journey of the sun, or the journey of the soul. So we're talking about reincarnation after reincarnation. When you look at the first page of the New Testament, you're talking about the genealogy, the generations going from Adam to Jesus.
Are we talking about Book of Numbers?
Well, no. The Book of Numbers gives you that in a different way. You get a replay similar to what you get in Chronicles 1 and 2, where the previous stories are being retold again, and you'll come across certain issues, like the first time you see or you hear about Satan in the Bible is a recount. There's a story where David is commanded by God to do a census, all the men, all the soldiers, all the cattle. But then when the story is retold, it was Satan who ordered the census. You know what I'm saying? Not many people catch that. And again, if your priest or your pastor isn't talking about it, you ain't supposed to bring it up in the form of question.
Well, in that particular example, is that a mistranslation? Is that like encoded knowledge? Like what is the purpose of having the name be Jesus and then change or God and then change to Satan afterwards?
Well, you actually see that happen a few times in the Bible. It's telling you the truth. Ultimately, we're talking about polarities. If we look at, there's a very famous stela, a relief in Egypt. You see it used more and more every day, where you see Horus or Haru, and he's got another head, the head of Set, his uncle, behind him. It's like he's got two heads, and this is where we get thee behind me, Satan. We're talking about the self, and we're talking about the shadow. So if you look at the Old Testament, I want to say Isaiah, it's Isaiah or Ezekiel, forgive me. O Lucifer, son of the morning, how thou art fallen, right? By the time you get to Revelation 22:16, it's saying Jesus is the bright and powerful morning star. Well, we know already, because we study, that 444 gives you Lucifer and Jesus. We're talking about the same person. The Bible's telling you the exact same thing.
And just to throw it out there, it's Isaiah 14:12-13, but you've got a 4, right? 3 plus 1 is a 4, and then the 2 plus 1 and the remaining 1 is a 4. So you've also kind of got the 444 right here, just in the passage number of Isaiah.
You see what I mean? Like, you can't get away from it. Like, they knew what they were doing. And then to a large degree, when you look at, okay, for example, the Catholic Bible. The Catholic Bible has, I think, 80 books, right? As opposed to the King James, that has 66. Bell and the Dragon and certain books were left in. And then you have the Apocrypha, the Nag Hammadi text, the Gnostic text, the Book of Enoch, for example, to which the majority of the Bible was actually copied from. That has much, much more of the truth. But you have to study it all. You have to study it all, because you'll notice the differences in the Book of Jubilees. You'll notice the differences in the Book of Jasher. You'll notice the comparisons. When we look at the King James Version, you've got 12 disciples, aside from Judas, who was killed and then replaced. And but you only have four gospels. Well, a year has 12 months and 4 seasons, right? Like, they're doing certain things to correspond to actually keep this world going. HARP isn't so much about controlling the weather as it is about giving you an idea that the weather is still normal and under normal circumstances. But that's a whole other story. So it's about how we choose to see things or how we're being led to see things, because there's a reason behind that.
I mean, it sounds overwhelming to read all the iterations of the Bible, because also when you get into like the nitty gritty of like the logical conclusion of this line of thinking, right? Then it's like, okay, let me learn how to read in Latin. Let me learn how to read in Greek. Let me learn how to read in even like ancient Hebrew. Let me start putting all those pieces together. It almost seems like even if you started when you were 8, there's not enough hours in the days and the years in a lifetime in order to do all of that, right? To reread all the iterations in different languages and can do all the comparisons, formulate your own thoughts. I mean, I guess you could like dedicate a life of study to that, which is kind of what like being a theologian would really be about. But it's such a tiny little niche of people that all these different intricacies and all these different comparisons between denominations, like they don't present themselves in the normal course of life, where it's like, let's talk about the exact differences between like the King James Bible versus all these other iterations.
No, you can't, especially if you want to maintain a type of control. Not just maintaining your current base, but allowing it to grow. You have to focus on the ignorance. You have to focus on the parts that you actually want, because if people look too hard or their perspective change, you're going to lose them. When you take information, it's ultimately going to be about, again, how we choose to see it. I think about it through the eyes of like maybe being a chef or being a cook, right? You can grow up on Italian and American cultural food, and maybe in college you tried Cuban cuisine and some Latino cuisine. You finally tried Chinese food. And you develop this international palate. You kind of have to be like that, when it comes to information, because anywhere we choose to be one-dimensional, we're choosing ultimately not to know. We're choosing not to see a connection between this and that, because we would rather see separation. And most people who go that route aren't even really cognizant of that fact. It's just more of a feeling, I just don't want to deal with that. Or maybe not right now. But when you get to a point, we'll use comic books. I grew up on comic books. Comic books gave me so much vocabulary. And
Can I ask you, Marvel versus DC?
Marvel all day.
All right, you can stay. If most of the time if someone says DC, they just immediately get kicked off the stream, and that's the end of the interview.
Make mine Marvel. What I'm saying? I love DC. But my issue with DC is more so the film aspect. Comics, you can't compete with Marvel. Their pantheon is that great. Yep. The X-Men alone, you know what I mean? Yep. But DC, they're almost forced to have to downplay their heroes and their villains, because if you look too close, the fundamentals are so blatant. So blatant. The gods they're based on. Take Batman. You know what I'm saying? I'll talk about Batman and I'll shut up about DC. If you look at Batman is cool for me because he largely deals with the Necronomicon. Not only does he deal with the Necronomicon, like he deals with religion. So
how does Batman deal with the Necronomicon?
Because Gotham and Arkham is directly out of the Necronomicon, right? That's directly from H.P. Lovecraft. Arkham Asylum. Gotham is a play on Golgotha. Golgotha, the place of the skull where Christ was crucified, right? You only see Batman at night. It's meant to be a shadow to Metropolis. Batman has these aspects of himself that he allows to run around, do some shit, and then he'll, lock them back up as opposed to killing them, which makes absolutely no sense, especially for as brutal and as traumatized as he actually is. Batman should do what Daredevil did when they wanted to reinvigorate Daredevil before the last 5 or 6 years, because Daredevil's been really good. Before that, they took Daredevil and they made him the leader of the Hand. The Hand is a ninja organization. I forget exactly what happened to the leader. Stick, his teacher, his mentor got killed, and Daredevil took over the Hand. And they had this whole Shadowland story arc. Batman running the League of Shadows. I mean, imagine that. They showed you that in like Batman Incorporated, where he had all these robots, but like that wasn't the same thing. But that's also that was a replay of what they did in Kingdom Come, where he got old and he couldn't be Batman anymore, but there was no Batman Beyond yet. So he had robots. Marvel it's just not going to happen. X-Men just had its 700th issue, the end of the Krakoan era, which was magnificent, written by Jonathan Hickman, which dropped so much science and so much gematria and so much in-depth gene information dealing with the idea of an Omega mutant and what that really means. We saw Storm go from being able to control the weather on Earth to being able to control it across the multiverse. Not only that, but she could open wormholes. We saw Magneto come back and take his true leadership role, and Charles become a traitor again to his own people. Through gematria, this makes a lot of sense. When you look at someone's numerology, because even these characters, they have names and they have birthdays, and you may be surprised what you see. Kal-El's birthday is different on Krypton than what Clark Kent's is on Earth. And they are two completely different people. Superman is a narcissist. Clark Kent is a liar. You know what I mean? But that is one-dimensional. The idea of secret identities is ultimately how we deal with the shadow self. Marvel is going to beat you with that every time, because every hero is flawed. The flaws in DC heroes, they aren't really, let's say, exploited in the right way.
Well, I've always seen that the DC heroes, kind of like you were saying, are just literal gods. But that also makes it so that they're so much harder, or it was for me, a lot of other people, to relate to, versus a human being that has human being problems, that now has superpowers, which in a lot of ways end up just being like an extra problem for your humanity, versus like, oh yeah, my dad's Poseidon. Oh yeah, I just came from a planet where we're like 100 times stronger than you and impervious to anything that harms you. And the only thing that can hurt me is kryptonite, another foreign substance that you'd have to get from like another world in order to hurt me. A lot of that it's a little bit harder to relate to for me.
And I can definitely understand that. It's much the same. I look at the different companies like I look at different ciphers, or like I look at different frequencies or different pantheons, because they're really the same thing. If you look at Iron Man, Tony Stark, you look at T'Challa, Black Panther of Wakanda, you look at Batman, they're really the same person, right? They're these filthy rich prince kings of these companies and these countries. They have trauma, and then they go out and do what they want, right? For different reasons, but essentially they're doing the same thing. Batman is a child who never grew up, who refuses to be a real person. It's all about Batman. Even Bruce Wayne is really the costume. right? He's just completely traumatized. He's had children. This dude took children out when they were 8 years old to fight crime. Look at what he really does with Robin. You know what I'm saying? Robin, mind you, Batman comes out at night. He wears blue, gray, black, dark colors, right? Robin is this bright red, green, yellow. You know, woohoo, here I am. He's using a child as bait. What does that sound like? What does that sound like? I really think about that. You know what I'm saying? Look at the Joker, his arch nemesis. We're looking at a 47. Now, you know, 47 is a very powerful number in Gematria. We're talking about the heart and the crown chakra. That's why he wears green and purple. You see what I mean? We're also talking about that leg bar. That's that heart energy, right? So that's the antithesis to what Batman is. That's his complete opposite, but he's being his true self, where Batman is the one running from the truth. You got Tony Stark, who lost his entire family and became a drunk. But because he was good at technology, now he runs the world through material wealth. But now it's about his ego, so he has to have the Avengers, the biggest, Earth's mightiest heroes, where you have T'Challa, Black Panther, who took down the Fantastic Four single-handedly, who rules a nation, who fights Namor and Doctor Doom and has this magical vibranium in his own pantheon, but he's hiding, essentially. He takes part and plays with the Avengers here and there, but he's not. You see, so when we look at them, and you can get a more in-depth understanding of why that is when you take their name and their birthday and you just read them like you would anybody else. You know, we can say, oh, they're not real, they exist in a comic book. If I said that about Jesus to somebody would be, you know, possibly ready to fight. I've been there many a day. If I say, you know, Muhammad didn't exist, somebody gonna try to take my head off. I'm from Detroit, largest population of so-called Middle Easterns outside the so-called Middle East.
Well, I want to ask you about that too, because you seem very well versed in like the different biblical and numerology and all this. How much do you know about, say, like Nations of Gods and Earths and 5% and like the offshoots of like Nation of Islam, and how, like, do any of these correlate to comic books in the same ways?
Completely. Great question. Thank you for that. There was a wonderful, powerful movie I did a decode on, came out earlier this year, called The Book of Clarence. The Book of Clarence was the greatest 5% movie I've probably ever seen. I did a 3-hour decode. I really wanted to do a part 2 that I haven't done yet. But the 5% Nation is all about, you know, the supreme mathematics. Supreme mathematics are displayed every day in more places than you can imagine. It's just about understanding the language. Clarence 13X, aka Father Allah, who was actually born right here in Danville, Virginia, was a master, you know, and the encoding in that movie, the idea of knowing that you were God, but not being able to give that information out. That's essentially what the 5%ers were doing, of the Nation of Gods and Earths, as opposed to trying to terraform the people into believing in a God outside of Christianity for a certain amount of time, which was Elijah Muhammad's, one of his tenets, as opposed to Clarence 13X, who wanted to tell people that they were God now. So you can see that in methodology. You can see that in reverence. You can see that through Wu-Tang. You know what I'm saying? There's a great comic book called The 9 Rings of Wu-Tang.
I got a copy behind me.
Yes, you already know. Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of great examples, but that reigns supreme. It definitely reigns supreme.
So you mentioned like Wu-Tang, and I think that's probably where I heard of Supreme Mathematics, but I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, right? It was just like meet me at the God Hour, and they were talking about like studying the different degrees, and then I had a couple of friends growing up too that had names that were based on 5%er language because their parents were like gods on earth. It's like one of my girlfriend's friends' name was like Born Unique Divine, just like ODB's name is like Asan Unique, like his actual name, right? Not the government name. But that was huge in the 90s and maybe like the early 2000s or so. And then what happened? Is it still as big now? Are people still signing up for Nations of Gods and Earths and 5%? Or did it have like a heyday and then it started fizzling out? Did it go underground? Because I don't hear about it nearly as much.
I would say a little bit of both. Shout out to Sunez in Brooklyn. Yeah, most definitely. Well, you had Wu-Tang Forever, right? Came out in 97, I think the double album, right? Triumph. When they started saying that the black man is God on the radio, that shit had to go. It was too powerful. Wu-Tang, you never heard about scandals. You never heard about, a lot of the bullshit that comes along with, being in the mainstream industry with Wu-Tang, because their numbers were so deep, but also because they demanded their respect. But after Wu-Tang Forever, they had to get off the radio. That they didn't get the play that they used to get because it became too powerful. So it kind of went back underground. They never stopped. Wu-Tang is still putting out albums and whatnot. Sons of Man, Ghostface Killer, Son. I mean, Killer. Shout out to Killer Priest. It goes on and on. But as in terms of mainstream, in terms of even being acknowledged, you can't do that because it gives credence, to something. It makes it, oh, this is real, and it can still be real, but we're not going to talk about it. So you have a mentality where if people see it on the news or if people see it on MTV Jams, it's real. If it's not there, it can't be real. We know that's not the case, but to a large degree, it still is.
Are there any historical, ancient, like mythological counterparts to the story of Jacob and like the big-headed scientists and like the human grafting stories?
The story of Jacob, for me, it always reminded me of Yaldabaoth, the original big-head scientists. Yaldabaoth, he fell into this realm and tried to copy what he saw. Now, however we want to look at it, whether through Gnosticism or through mythology, we're talking about a baby that didn't stay in the oven long enough. We're talking about, this divine abortion. So we have flaw here. We have this illusion of time here. We have this grandiose idea that we can somehow make this world better when anything you do here will dissolve, right? So obviously the purpose isn't exactly what we think it is, but this plays into this idea of separation. There is no separation. True divine timing is realizing who you are once you get back to your mind. So everything before that was just preparation for that one moment. Was it real? Of course it was. How much weight, how much gravitas does it actually hold? That depends on your perspective and where you want to give it. But the references are everywhere. Another obvious one would be Megamind. Cartoon movie came out a few years ago.
Right.
Also, The Island of Dr. Monroe, Frankenstein. There's a lot. It's just symbolism. But it's also
Prometheus into that mix too. The original version of the Prometheus movie from the Alien series was about these architects or engineers, I think they called them, that originally found this substance of God that let them create real life because it was of God, but then they ran out of it, or they used it for some other purpose, like they put it in their cars to drive around. They ran out, and then they had to make their own version of it. And that's kind of what started the whole alien mythology was people trying to recreate something out of perfection based on their limited knowledge and inferior supplies.
Right. And that's the black goo, right?
Exactly.
Now that same black goo is what they have to feed quantum computers, the D-Wave computers, that they have to keep at like a sub-zero temperature, right? That people stand next to them and say, I feel like I'm standing next to a god, and they're not connected to anything, no internet, but they can figure out all these equations that are just binary code, zeros and ones. You see? So when we look at Alien, for example, perfect reference, we're talking about like the divine feminine, right? That's why it's so ugly. And again, we're back to this idea of the Necronomicon, these ugly human urges. What does that look like? It looks like a chest buster. You know what I mean? It looks like these hybrids. On the flip side of that, you get Predator that looks like an African warrior. But every time you see him, he's in these spaceships and he's around these step pyramids. What are they trying to tell you? You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing. The new trailer for the latest Alien movie is very telling. You know what I'm saying? But again, we're back to this idea of this face hugger. And you see this face hugger, this 8 and this 10 grabbing onto somebody's face. That's Kundalini rising. It looks like death. It looks like assimilation. It's essentially, it's one and the same, but are we talking about just this one dimension? Or are we talking about what they're moving on to? Because they're moving on to something. We just don't see it on the screen.
In the comic book world, I would always, and reading comic books, to go back to what you said earlier about increasing your vocabulary, that was the first time that I ever even considered that comic books weren't just rotting my brain, was because that there was some teacher that was like commending me and my friend in like 7th grade. And it was like, wow, how did you know what, this, whatever, I can't remember what the term was. It was in science class. I was like, oh, that was in like the latest X-Men comic. They were talking all about whatever the hell the scientific concept was about. Like, I don't really understand it. I just knew what the phrase was and how to spell it in the context it was used in. And that was the first time I was like, oh, wow, maybe I'm actually learning more from this comic book than I am from this class, because I can't remember what the class was about, but I still remember the comic book.
Man, I'm trying to tell you, I've learned to this day, I'm consistently learning from comics. That's one thing that I get every week. There's a comic called Transmetropolitan.
Is that still running, or I thought that was done?
Oh, it's been done. It's
Okay.
just a classic. I go back to it. Spider Jerusalem taught me a lot. You know what I'm saying? I go back to that all the time. Sandman is another one. We want to talk about the occult. Any and Everything by Alan Moore. V for Vendetta and Watchmen, and
I think everything you just mentioned is DC or Vertigo, by the way.
well, Vertigo.
They get a special pass.
Yeah, they really do. They really do. Now, there's Image. You have Red Room. Red Room is incredible. If you haven't heard of Red Room, I would really suggest you look that one up. Red Room, the Department of Truth is incredible. Shout out to Jonathan Hickman. He's really, really big in Marvel right now, but he started out doing things like the nightly news. Anybody?
So Red Room.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that's a sad story, man, because he recently offed himself, I believe.
Yeah.
Ed Piskor, because he did. Yeah, that's why I haven't actually read any of this Red Room before, but all my links are purple on it, because I remember when that happened. I knew him from he did like a hip hop comic where he illustrated like all the old 80s and 90s hip hop groups growing up. That's how I remember him. And I didn't even know that he did like this weird like dark web BDSM type stuff.
Man, this comic is wild. It's absolutely wild. Red Room is crazy.
I'll have to grab a copy.
Department of Truth is awesome. God is Dead is incredible. Anybody who's a fan of any kind of god or demon or pantheon, religion, you want to see that shit get completely wiped away, check out God is Dead. It is incredible. You know, occult comics, that's really what brought me back to comics. You know what I'm saying? This idea of so much being displayed and being dropped and it being obscure and, you know, not having the eyes on it that it should. You know, those covers are incredible. That's one of my favorite series.
Yeah, I've never even heard of it, and I love Jonathan Hickman. To be honest, man, like my current experience in the comic book world is like either working on my own comics or reading like weird Tijuana Bibles from like the 60s and 70s, like all the weird like underground shot comic stuff. Just because I feel like if you were describing earlier about the chef that should like travel the world and taste all the cuisines, right? I just feel like I haven't had a lot of that 1970s underground comic cuisine yet added to my palate. So I'm really trying to double down on that because it feels uniquely American in so many ways that I'm trying to kind of capture, as opposed to being as influenced by all these freaking these British writers.
Absolutely. Absolutely, as you should. You move at your own speed. You know what I'm saying? I'm a geek, nerd, studier, researcher. You call it what you want, but this is my cup of tea. So you know, you've got.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad that you mentioned this. I hadn't heard of it, so yeah, this is on the top of my reading list now.
Is, you know, and don't, not that you are, you know, you don't want to knock yourself, you know what I'm saying? And you've got time to experience, you move as you see fit, but there's a grand myriad of wonderful books, wonderful subjects out here, yet to be discovered. And they're, you know, obscure for a reason, you know. Again, occult means hidden. So, you know, it's going to be hidden just based off its own energy, its own frequency. We have to go looking for it. But you'll be surprised what you'll find, you know, when we take just a little bit of time and go look. It's incredible. And again, comics are a medium that comes out every week, just like movies do. You know, I don't care what the genre or what the company, you get this consistent eschatological field of energy that comes out every single week. And even just looking to see what comes out, you'd be amazed, you know, what may hit you, especially when it comes to corresponding to other things going on in the world.
I do got to put you on a little self promo here, but if you like occult style comics and like ancient gods and stuff, I do have this series called Secret Mystery School. That's basically it's a 4-part series. It's already ended, but it goes into Gematria and interdimensional philosophy and psychedelics and enlightenment in general. The basic premise is that these two dudes, Phil and Colin, which is a nod to Phil Collins, but also philosophy because the girl's name is Sophia.
Yes.
And the whole premise is that Phil, he's like a psychonaut, and he takes a very specific blend of psychedelics on a school trip out Mount Shasta, and he kind of accidentally reaches enlightenment temporarily, and he's able to open this door that only the ascended masters or like truly enlightened people have ever had access to. So he basically gets the key to this door for a short amount of time, doesn't realize what he's doing, opens it up, and they all go through it, and now they have to become actually enlightened in order to get back home so they can kind of like open that door again. So it has them going and meeting Diogenes, the dog, and it gets into like Epicurean philosophy. Then they go and meet Pythagoras. They meet Aristotle, Socrates, and they have to like basically go back through high school again, but they're being taught by Pythagoras, and they're being taught by all these like ancient philosophers. But this is like my love letter to like sort of occult philosophy. The whole premise of this originally was like, what if Harry Potter was trained by Manly Palmer Hall? But it kind of went off the rails once I actually started it, because you know the comic book format, you have to kind of like go way outside of what the expectations are. But I think you would like, if you're listening or if you're watching, and God is Dead and all these other ones sound interesting to you, I definitely recommend checking out My Secret Mystery School.
I will cop all of these as soon as we are done here. This is absolutely dope. My only question is, how could you possibly squeeze that incredible concept into 4 issues? That is dope. That is absolutely dope. That is that's what we need more of. If there's something we need more of, we need more of this. This is dope because these kinds of amalgamations, when you have certain influences, you have certain references, but you make it your own, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than that. This is dope.
It's not easy. Yeah, the tall order. Like, for example, issue 4 alone talks about Pythagoreanism. It breaks down the Eleusinian mysteries. It actually goes through the entire process of fasting, finding Iacchus, finding Demeter, Persephone, like dying, going underworld, and then coming back, and the whole origins of consciousness. I've got like a 3-page spread, which doesn't fold out because I couldn't afford to print it as a fold out, but it's basically a 3-page fold out that shows the whole progression of religion from like caveman all the way to modern day. It's definitely a tall order. The artists that I had work with me on it weren't delighted when they saw the script, but this is probably my current magnum opus, I think.
Dude, like, no bullshit, man. This is amazing. This is amazing. You should be really, really proud of this. I'm gonna promote the fuck out of this.
And you might like this too, just because it's like such a nerd comic book video gamer sort of like centric. But the whole premise of issue 3 is that they have to go into the labyrinth and defeat the Minotaur. And I mean, all the occult symbolism behind that is in here, but they also it's very literal, except for when he gets to the very inside of the labyrinth. In order to kill the Minotaur with an axe, it's actually, he has to beat him in Guitar Hero. So he has to use like a guitar battle axe to defeat the Minotaur. I don't know, it's like and the guitar and all like the wordplay and all the symbolism play. I don't know. I think you'd particularly really like this one.
Yeah, I'm loving it already. I'm absolutely loving it. It's so dope because you make it real. And you make it real to the characters. I can see, your characters well enough to where you can just put them in situations, and then the story writes itself. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's
the goal, man. That's why Marvel I like so much, is because I kind of already think I know how certain characters would react, but I only know like what their emotions might be. I can almost never predict like what their actual actions would be. Whereas DC, it's almost like they all have a freaking formula they wear on their chest, that it's like, if I'm angry, I do this, and if I'm sad, I do this, which is a little bit less complex. Not to make it about Marvel and DC again, but that's kind of how I see it. The same way that like a chef has their list of ingredients, right? Like, some ingredients are so overpowering. Like, you don't just throw ginger in every freaking plate you make, because then everything you make is gonna kind of taste like ginger. Like, you got to know when to use it and when not to.
Exactly. It's like Chopped. You know what I'm saying? You got your characters, and they got these baskets in front of them with ingredients. They don't know what they are, and they have a certain time limit. What you gonna do?
That's a great analogy, man. It's like, yeah, man, writing a story is very much like an episode of Chopped.
Exactly. You know what I mean? But then, you realize the more you go through that process that it's just you being you. You don't necessarily see it ahead of time, because you don't know what your ingredients are. You don't know, who you're working with and who you got to run around in the kitchen, so to speak, or who you got to impress, at the judges table. But you see that, win or fail, it was all you the whole time. You know what I mean? It's about that inertia of consciousness. You move at your own velocity, but you have to control it. You have to focus it. When you let it be, when it gets to like, okay, something new, it's going to respond. The energy has to respond. You can't have cause without effect. You remember at all times you are the magic. You know what I'm saying? I see that in those covers. You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate that. We're running a little bit long, and I got a segment that I want to end out on. So let me just play a little intro, and then I'll explain it.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
All right, this is a fan favorite, and I can't ever skip this one. I think I might have forgotten once or twice in like my last 80 episodes, but you're here and you're here for it, and people love this one. So the rules is basically I'm just going to mention a certain conspiracy theory or like a cult concept, and you're just going to give me a rating from 1 to 10 based on how valid you think that thing is. That makes sense?
Yeah, most definitely. That's the bet.
So I'll start with one of the easiest ones, which is Bigfoot. If you had to rate how much you believe in Bigfoot from 1 to 10, where would you end up?
I'll give it an 8.
What about flat Earth?
10.
What about, let's say that the moon is localized. Do you think that humans have ever stepped foot on a localized moon within the concept of flat Earth?
Never. It's not a physical place you can go.
Is the plane that we're on an infinite plane in flat Earth?
Yes.
And I want to jump out of the 1 through 10 just so I don't lose the track here, because I rarely find people that are willing to engage like deeply on some of the flat Earth topics, and the one that I am the most fascinated in is the concept of an infinite plane, which would then, I guess, posing in a form of a question, does that mean there's infinite land?
Yeah. Ooh, good question. Good question. I would say yes and no. So we know that the realm that we inhabit, i.e., supposedly this ice wall, and then these oceans and these supposed continents, and then there's something beyond that. It has to be more water, and it has to be more land. I think more water, perhaps even ice, than land, but definitely more land.
And does this mean with infinite land that there's like infinite molecules, infinite dust, infinite water, and just infinite everything? Like, is there actually possible that there could ever be a shortage of anything?
No, not at all. Life, what was that Jurassic Park said? Life finds a way. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's scarcity only exists in the mind. It really, really does. I cannot stress enough how we choose to see the world is how it's going to be. Here in the West, we talk about scarcity. I'm a big dude. I'm 6'4", 230. I used to play football. I used to be almost 400 pounds. You know what I mean? So like, scarcity. Now you want to eat, you're going to eat something. If you ain't got the money to eat, you're going to do what you need to do. You know what I mean? We're never going to run out of anything. If you take all the people in the world, you could put them in Texas, and they could have their own acreage. This idea of overpopulation and the Georgia Guidestones. You saw what happened to the Georgia Guidestones 2 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not going to happen. If we want it to happen, if we allow it to happen, that's a different story. But we got to be real at the same time and understand that a lot of people suffer here, and they've gotten used to putting that suffering on things outside of themselves. And that becomes a religion in and of itself.
Right, let me jump back into the 1 to 10 really quick so I can finish this out. Because I'm interested, like, what would you rate, say, like a demon, like a biblical Catholic demon from 1 to 10?
I would go 5, 6, because one person's demon is another person's angel. Essentially, we're talking about the same thing, but daemon originally meant genius. It means a deeper concept. So we have to also remember error and connotation and definition, because people hear demons because of Hollywood. You get scared and get these certain ideas, but demon is dealing with your own deeper inner thoughts. When we really get down to the Necronomicon, we're talking about human urges. You know what I mean? So it's about control ultimately, and being able to face your fears.
and I've had pushback on this from actual theologians before, so this might not be the most accurate version of this. But when someone mentions demon now, I also think of like King Solomon with his seals and his magic rings, where he would like not necessarily summon a demon with sharp teeth and horns and like a scary thing, but it was more like a daemon, like this running process, or like a concept that he would summon and have that concept just like work itself out through his means, or like under the exact same concept of like a computer daemon, like a background running task, just like does things that make your life a little bit easier, but it's not necessarily like summoning an actual spirit. Although some people would claim like a lot of the original engineers that gave us modern computing, Charles Babbage is one of my favorite examples, but like there's stories that when he was a kid, he was obsessed with summoning demons, like biblical demons. And there's a number of other people that are related to our modern technology that we're just obsessed with truly biblical demons, not like the spiritual ones, at least that I'm aware of. Like even Thomas Edison made one of the first Hollywood movies, and the main star was Mephisto, right? Or Mephistopheles, basically the same entity. So I'm wondering, to pose the question, like, is AI demonic? Like, do we have demons inside of our computers, or angels inside our computers? If you're saying demons and angels are a matter of perspective.
I would hope so. To be perfectly honest with you, I would hope so. If they're in the food, supposedly, if they're in the air, in the frequencies, our cell phones, there's 5G radiation and things of that nature, microwaves and whatnot, cable, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, right? They would have to be in the devices. They would have to be. I would hope they were, honestly, because again, now that's going to sound crazy to some people, I'm sure, but that's people who haven't dealt with their own fear, and they haven't dealt with their own ignorance, and they truly just haven't studied enough. Many of us were afraid of the basement until we went down there and saw that there was nothing down there. And then it was getting over the feeling because we had programmed ourselves. But at some point, your mom said, go down the basement and grab this out the freezer. You ain't thinking about it no more. It becomes self-conditioning. So they would have to be, just based on frequency, just based on, if I'll put it to you like this. They couldn't see separation the way we do. They're not going to look into your computer or your phone or your flat screen or your modem and say, I don't like this person's religion. I don't like this person's complexion. I don't like this person's gender. I'm not going to walk over there. We do that based on ego. They don't have ego. The ego is such a mundane thing. It only exists here. These entities, whether we want to look at them as good or bad or evil or otherwise, they don't have that. They don't have that mentality. They're slightly above us. So the last thing they're thinking about is somebody's opinion. I'm going to chill right here on this park bench in your computer. You know what I mean?
I like the visual I got in my mind that, like, there's someone that's like going through McDonald's drive-through and they're eating some fries and they're on their iPhone, and there's like an angel in their iPhone and there's an angel in their fries, essentially. I never even considered that concept of like not being bound to the same limitations, where like I mean, to us, everything is separated because we're in the material realm. So you already have these perceived notions of like where like the end of my fingertip ends and where this thing that I'm about to touch begins, are these separate entities. But I guess to an angel or a demon, it's all just different matter, and they don't even necessarily end and start the same way that we perceive them to.
Well, yeah. Well, certain things we want to keep at the forefront of our consciousness. These things, these entities, they need you way more than you need them. You have to activate them. If you want to give your power over to them, you can do that. And, the results can be detrimental. But once you realize that this is just a reflection of you, and you can take control of it the same way you would your phone or your laptop, you know, people don't worship their electricity. You know, I'm going to pray to Zeus when I plug this plug in, this laptop don't blow. You know, like Zeus, I paid my light bill. You know, do what you're supposed to do. Well, talk to these demons and to these angels. And, you know, an angel is an angle of light. You know, light comes into this reality at a 42-degree angle. Well, there's that 42 again. So we can understand why they want to attach certain terminology to that to make you think otherwise or think less of it or think less of yourself. Ultimately, we're talking about self-hate. So again, when we go back to this tenet of knowing thyself and understanding that everything is a reflection of you, everything here is a power-up. Like, you're supposed to be Mario out here, and everything is a mushroom. You know, if we want to see it as a Koopa Trooper and run the other way, we can do that too, but that's not going to benefit you. That's not going to serve you.
I think we should end it on that, man, because that's the perfect analogy. Just everything out here is a mushroom, and you're in a Mario game. I like that.
Straight up, perfect simulation.
Give a shout out to where people can find you if they like what they heard and where they can find more.
Thank you again for the invitation. This has been absolutely wonderful. I hope we can do this again.
Hunter, we have to do some comic book breakdowns because I feel like you could get me back up to speed. You mentioned that X-Men had like their 700th issue. I don't know if I've opened a X-Men comic aside from like very limited runs because I really cared about like Wolverine and Domino or something. But I don't think I've really cared as much since like the late 90s and Uncanny X-Men and stuff. So I've got a lot of catching up to do. And I feel like you might be one of the perfect people to help me get back up to speed.
Oh, man, listen. The Krakoa era that just ended with issue 35 in original numbering was issue 700. Absolutely incredible. It starts with the Powers of X and House. What is it? Powers of X and House. Rise of the House of the Powers. Some 2 books that are absolutely incredible, and it really expands from there. It will be an honor. That is easily the best X-Men story since Fatal Attractions in the 90s. Which we saw play out on X-Men 97.
Those are big words, man.
Oh, it's I read, you know what I'm saying? Especially since I go back to revisit because I'll see certain things. This is my Instagram page, Culture24. You guys can hit me up there. I got a link in my bio that takes you to my Patreon, Kunami Codes, Mystery Arcade, Occult Multiversity. You can get readings there. You can DM me. I'm on Facebook, Hillel Keano. I have a digital library that I built on Telegram that has over 40,000 books. I add to it every day. For $3 a month, you can subscribe and get access to that. I'm trying to give Scribd and Amazon a run for their money and give you a little bit more in terms of, you know, books that are out of print or rare, especially in terms of the occult. You see like that book right there, Her Blood is Gold. That's every cover. Yeah, that's all 700 covers. And comic books are also available. From omnibus to individual issues. And if anybody has any requests, please just let me know. But you can find me, you type my name into just about any platform and you'll be able to find me. You can get at me however you can get at me. My readings are $72. I keep them low for a reason. I'm not doing this to get rich. I'm also a counselor and a consultant. I see people who use some of these sciences, some of this knowledge, to charge people hundreds and thousands of dollars. I'm trying to make peers. Followers are amazing. I love, I just got to 24,000 followers. I'm thankful for each and every one, but I don't want to be a pariah to my people or to anyone else's. I'm trying to be the change I want to see. So, everything is affordable. As you can see from some of the books that I have available there. And please holler at me, if you just need a question answered, holler at me. I'm very accessible. You don't have to, pay me just to talk to me. I'm not one of those people.
I appreciate it, man. I'm definitely going to take you up on that. We're going to talk way more. I want to get Slick in here too, man. Fix your microphone and fix your internet, and then you're invited to all of these.
Yeah, man. Slick is a beast. Slick is an amazing artist. He makes these incredible collages, these incredible art pieces. But he goes in, on the Enneagram. He goes in on the way. I feel
like Slick is like for me, I feel like I understand what I want a visual to be like. I already see it in my head, and it takes almost all my time just trying to execute the thing that I'm already seeing. But with Slick, man, I feel like he sees it all, but he spends so much time trying to get other people to understand it. Like, he understands it because it just makes sense. It's almost just like seeing like water freeze or seeing like fire incinerate something, but it's not so easy to explain in words and visuals. Like the Enneagram stuff took me forever to understand that until I sat down with Slick and he started explaining to me in different ways, the exact same way that I kind of hated math growing up until I found out about, I don't know if there's a real name, like Vedic math, where like or magic math is another name for it, where it's not just like carry the one, you know what I mean? And borrow from the 9. Now all of a sudden it's like all these mantras and how if you multiply something by 9, the numbers individually add up to 9 because of all these cool ways that math interconnects with itself. So I feel the exact same way about how Slick approaches tarot and Gematria and the Enneagrams.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least, spit, we get heavy rotate when the beat hits. So thank us, you're welcome. Fuck them niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.